It's just trying to study what we've suggested, but they had very defined positions on many issues. My feeling is that ideally, but Mr. Hadjiroussos has said that this is difficult. The ideal would be to have a unified delegation of the minorities, maybe not actively, because it tends to be looked at in rather diplomatic terms, not actively necessarily involved in negotiations, but be ready, I think, as a delegation to offer advice and to try to press. And if the negotiations, they're telling you that the time is not yet ready, well, perhaps it gives some indication of when their views would be welcome, would be useful. There are a number of avenues. I mean, Tony has mentioned the European avenue. I note, and I just checked the internet before this meeting, that the so-called advisory committee on the Framework Convention, which visited Cyprus, I think was it last year, I think?
A few weeks ago.
A few weeks ago, okay. Yes. Because if one looks at the website, the comments of the committee and the government response should have been available yesterday, but they're not. I've just checked now. They're still embargoed. I wouldn't be surprised, though, if the government already knew the conclusions and had a response ready maybe for tomorrow. I don't know. Puts us in a slightly disadvantaged position, but that's not the only avenue. So I think what one has to do is to discuss various ways by which influence could be brought. But there's a saying in English that you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. So I think we have to bear that in mind. I'm a little surprised that Mr. Downer has not been more receptive, but he is an experienced diplomat. Perhaps he could be a person you could prevail on. As far as the European framework is concerned, you have the advisory committee, so we will know very soon what they are saying about Cyprus and what the response of the government is. We must surely know within a few days or a week. And if not, I think perhaps the Secretariat of the Council of Europe could be contacted or the Secretariat of the Framework Convention to find out what's going on, since clearly the Maronites and other minorities are very definitely implicated. There's another agency at Europe, and I happen to know the director because he was a member of my committee a few years ago, the European Fundamental Rights Agency. You might very well be interested, the EFA, based in Vienna. The director is Mr. Morten Kjær, who was formerly director of the Danish Institute of Human Rights and a member of the UN Committee on Racial Discrimination. It's sometimes better to contact an individual rather than just an organization in an abstract way. And because I know Morten quite well, I'd be very happy if you...
You say Martin?
I'll spell it. It's a Danish name. Happy to add my name to that. I think you've already had a visit from the High Commissioner for Human Rights of the Council of Europe, Mr. Hammerberg. He's certainly referred to in the literature as having made a visit in 2008. And again, it's an individual. It might very well be useful to update him. So I'm suggesting a range of possibilities, but as far as possible in a coordinated way. I note in the literature, Cyprus went through at the United Nations last year what we call the Universal Periodic Review, in which other governments look at the human rights performance of the Republic of Cyprus and make suggestions and recommendations. Only 2 governments commented on the minorities. They commented on everything else, but only 2 governments commented on the minorities. One was the UK, that made a point actually about Turkish Cypriots. And the other that made a number of interventions was Armenia, the government of Armenia. I mean, I'd leave it to your judgment to see if further, conversation with those governments could be at all useful. But there's something else referred to in the Cyprus report, that Cyprus declares itself open to receive any of what we call the special procedures at the United Nations. And these include, for example, I don't know how many mandates there are, there are really rather a lot of them, but there is one called the Special Independent Expert on Minority Rights, on minorities, again whom I know rather well and I've worked with very recently, and she too is a former member of Ms. Gay McDougall, who's a former member of our committee, and she's very forceful. I think she has made a visit to Turkey, and it might be interesting to try and engage her office, because she makes very detailed recommendations, and she's really quite a tough person. It might be of great interest to her, especially given the conflict element. The other rapporteurs that could be useful would be the one on internally displaced persons. There is a UN rapporteur on that one as well. I mean, I would have to look through the list to see who would perhaps be most useful. I don't know if necessarily contacting NGOs would be, some of the international NGOs. I'm not sure how Cyprus would react. There's another possibility, but I'm rather reluctant to suggest it, is that our committee, uniquely in the United Nations, has a procedure we call the Early Warning and Urgent Action Procedure, which some governments object to, but we maintain. And let me just give you a similar case. We dealt with a case some distance from Cyprus, of Nepal, among others. We usually have 12 or 13 cases per session. But the reason why we were interested in the Nepal case, and this was on behalf of some indigenous peoples, was because they were drafting a constitution. And the argument was, well, if they don't get a place in the constitution,